It's been an interesting week in terms of news. There's lots happening. There's the Olympics, of course. Some disappointments, but also some really good performances. And there's still hope. I remember a few weeks ago in this very program, sticking my neck out and saying we could win a track and field gold or a track and field medal. If not a gold. India has never won a track and field medal in the Olympics ever, and track and field is considered the height of Olympic achievement. And that possibility still remains with our javelin thrower Neeraj Chopra. It's also been an interesting but unproductive week in Parliament because of the logjam between the government and the opposition. Both seem fairly fixated on their positions. So it's highly unlikely that we are going to see any movement forward. The opposition parties want a debate on key issues, starting with the Pegasus snooping controversy. They'd like the Prime Minister or the Home Minister to be present in the House during that. Doesn't seem like it is going to be happening, so we are not going to be seeing too much work happening in Parliament. But amidst all this, and I think this is really the story of the week. Amidst all this is the fact that India has finally gotten rid of a piece of legislation that should have never been passed in the first place. And over the past decade came to stand for all that was bad about India's policy making, economic policy making especially. Every time you spoke to anyone, both Indian or both an Indian investor or a foreign investor, this legislation would come up, and this is the legislation that empowers the government to retrospectively tax indirect transactions. Essentially, it's something that's very easy to apply, to explain through an example. And the example here is Vodafone, which is in the news for other reasons also. Vodafone acquired the Indian operation that became Vodafone India through an acquisition. And because the underlying asset was in India, although the company itself was incorporated outside, the Indian tax authorities felt that they had the right to charge this. They lost a case in the Supreme Court that came, and when they argued it, and then soon after, around 9 years ago, passed a law which gave them the power to tax. So first there was a tax that was levied. It was challenged in court. They lost the case, and then they passed an amendment. They passed a law which gave them the retrospective power to tax these transactions. And sure enough, created a huge furore, not just in India but in many parts of the world, because many of these investments also happen under the aegis of bilateral investment agreements that India has with many countries in the first world, with many large countries. And it fell afoul of any such agreement, right? I mean, this tax was not something that could be countenanced or explained or justified under any such agreements. India lost in international arbitration proceedings, and over the last few years things have progressively become worse. I'll come to that in a minute. The interesting thing is, when this law was passed, the BJP opposed it. It was then in the opposition and it opposed it, so that in 2014 when the BJP came to power, everyone expected that this would be among the first things that the government would scrap. Because scrapping it would have sent the right signal to foreign investors, scrapping it would have sent the right signal to domestic investors. I think it would have been a very progressive move to make. And they waited for 7 years, and I have no idea why they waited, other than that, you know how it is, right? I mean, when the taxman takes something away, it's very difficult to make him give it back, and it's probably that. But now finally they've scrapped this, and I think this could put an end, and I say could because it still doesn't do everything that needs to be done, but could put an end to around 18 disputes that the government has, the most notable ones being with Vodafone and with Cain. And Cain, and this is what I was referring to some time back, Cain actually has staked its claim to Indian assets overseas on the basis of arbitration awards that it has won. Now, the reason why I say the government has done enough but not all that it could do is because it's offering to pay back the principal of the tax that it collected. Some of the interest collected is not going to be paid back. It remains to be seen whether the companies, and they've not given an official response yet, it's expected any time. In fact, it could well come before, between the time that this video is being recorded and between the time and the time it is aired. If my sense is, and here it's just an hypothesis, my sense is these companies will probably go for the offer because everyone wants to put an end to messy litigation, messy arbitration, all kinds of accounting that needs to be done and move forward. But it could well be that they hold out for the government to actually scrap the thing in its entirety. Also, a clear lesson on how economic policy should be made. Because if you were to ask me why I'm saying this, it's because in the last almost a decade, if there's one piece of legislation that has done immeasurable harm to India's standing as a global destination for investment, to India's standing as a progressive policy-making country, to India's standing as a country that is focused on making it easy to do business, it is this legislation. Every time in fora, international as well as domestic fora, the issue of this retrospective tax has been raised and it has been criticized significantly because, you know, it can only be criticized. There's nothing that justifies it. So I think finally it's been scrapped. I think it's an extremely progressive move. It should have been done 7 years ago, but still, you know, there's no point quibbling about time, especially when it comes to policies. One is happy that it is being done now, and I'm hoping that from now on we will be a lot more progressive when it comes to making policies, especially related to tax.